I'm focused on the Union Graduate School. It's the thing that I put my time and energy into. And rather than just do a history about who, what, and when, which I think is not very interesting, I'm trying to put the graduate school in the context of progressive American higher education since, you know, I really thinking about starting this with Antioch and the work-study program when Gould takes over, because it's out of that framework that people show up at Antioch, and it's out of that, you know, the Antioch people that get involved in developing the union and bring Goodwin in for the doctoral program and Roy, and you know, then we go through 7,000 graduates of UGS, and the point is, it's not about this particular innovation is over, it's come and gone, and I want to build the website that puts it in the context of American higher education in general, but specifically around progressive education, progressive higher education. And I've been trying to, you know, I've taken, remember the faculty meeting that we videotaped in 2005? I have all the tapes of that, and I've edited those tapes down with different people talking about interdisciplinarities and social relevance, key components, and they're different faculty talking about that for up to 90 seconds. You know, like on methodology, it's, you know, patent. And, you know, trying to, if you came upon the website, that you'd get a kind of feel for what the graduate school was in American higher education, and what's its, you know, how do we frame it? And I can't think a better way of framing it than to look at where it fits in the whole progressive education framework. And that's what I want to do. I want to have conversations with people that I can put on the website that talk about the development of this particular innovation, and you know, some of its successes and failures and all that kind of stuff about, you know, how it all came together. And so that's what I would like the end result to be. And I've made some progress. I mean, I've got a lot of material on the website, which is, I'm taking everything and putting it into PDFs and putting it up on the website. And then I'm constructing a little story that goes along with it so that it'll link to these sources, you know. So when, for example, when it talks about the first time that I had anything to do with the union was that I came to evaluate the graduate school with 3 guys after Dressel and his report was, you know, thrown out by the union and the North Central because it was such a negative. I think I have that, but I can't find it because it was, all copies were supposed to be destroyed of Paul Dressel's report.
Is the web page up?
Yeah, it's up. Yeah. And you know, but it's boring. It's not. It doesn't have any vitality to it yet. And I think that if I can interview folks like you and you know, to put some human dimension to this, you know, innovation and people that were intimately involved with it. So I thought I'd try to do it. I mean, that's my little agenda for my later years.
When you talk about progressive education, are you talking specifically about the tradition that comes out of Dewey?
Yeah. I'm talking about how the graduate school fits into Dewey's. You know, he wasn't around by the time we got rolling, but it was, you know, the combination of theory and practice is his idea, the idea about decision making and considering alternatives, and that was built into our whole pedagogy of the graduate school. And yeah, that's the guy that I would put. Who was it? Michael said something, I forget who made the comment, but I really liked it, was that, you know, Dewey lost and Thorndike won. If you look at No Child Left Behind and all the other stuff. So I'm more interested in that thread from Dewey, you know, and its reflection. You know, Tim Pitkin's a big piece of this, and those first 10 liberal arts colleges that got together, they did UWW. I can't go into UWW. It's huge. so many sites, so many issues, and I was never intimate about UW. I went, you know, and I went to the place in Fresno where they were stealing money and things like that, you know, and found that out, and found that the president of the Fresno UWW was running a program from jail because the FBI came in and handcuffed him and take it out. Well, that's interesting stuff, but that's not the stuff of higher education. That's the stuff of sensationalism, you know. And all
Flaming Rainbow.
Flaming Rainbow, another beautiful example that totally got fucked up.
Best name ever for a...
Best name ever for a university, period.
That's where I was.
Yeah, that's where he was. He went to Flaming
I
Rainbow.
wrote the first accreditation report for Flaming Rainbow.
For Flaming Rainbow. Have you seen this thing that Ed Harris has?
Yeah, on the web?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got it. It's on my website.
What did Ed do?
He did a very short paper
On
UWW.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a he like set the parameters of the UWW. He didn't get into any of the.
He was a graduate student with me at UMass.
Yeah, and ran the UMass UWW.
Yeah, for all long time.
It's a
Almost
call
20
for
years.
Oh,
research. It's a
Call for research.
call
That's
for
what it
people,
is. Yep.
for history, for
Yeah.
people to rescue the memory of the Union of Experimenting Colleges before it's completely lost. He gives just sort of a
Very thin overview.
Where is he now? Is he still at Loyola or DePaul? He was at DePaul for a long time. Ed. Is Ed still at DePaul?
I
Is he
thought he was
retired?
in Massachusetts.
No,
yes, he's retired.
I'm sure he's retired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
But he wrote it with that's a dual article that you're talking about,
Yeah.
dual author. I think the other author was from DePaul, I can't remember. Catherine Michaels?
No, Catherine was
beautiful girl.
Matthew or something.
Whatever, remember her?
She was Barbara Knutsen's assistant, and she ran the UWW at Minnesota.
Mm.
Moreno was her name.
Oh,
Catherine
that's
Moreno.
good. That's good. That's very good. Yeah, I'm impressed.
Now, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Did Meiklejohn fit into, did he ever enter these conversations that you were a part of?
Only when you showed up. You brought Meiklejohn into the conversation. Because you would talk about that, when you were assistant to the president, on the faculty. And I knew about him because I was in Wisconsin where they had a lot of attention paid to him. But, and I thought it was curious that we were never able to interest the folks at the union, but, and it was a kind of a, what do you call it, a snobbery thing, because he wasn't, at the high levels of academia, PhD land work. He talked about basic, incredibly good.
See, I've always been puzzled by the fact that you don't hear more about Meiklejohn. Meiklejohn and Dewey themselves, they knew each other. They considered each other to be on opposite sides of a number of issues. Meiklejohn, at the time he was doing the experimental college at Wisconsin, was explicitly interested in adults and grown-ups, and became increasingly interested in grown-up education.
Right.
And Dewey was seen as being interested in children.
Well, yeah, he did the lab school. I mean, come
Yeah.
on, that was the little kids.
And much of the argument between them had really pivoted off that difference in emphasis.
Huh.
But they were both interested in, when it comes down to the essentials, I think the same thing, and that was how in the hell do you educate people in a democracy for their duties as citizens in order to preserve freedom and democracy.
Right.
That's really what it was all about.
Correct.
Where would you put, where would you put Arthur Morgan in between them or in relationship to them?
Well, in my world, he never figured.
He was a pragmatist for sure. I'll just say one aside, and Ben knows this. I grew up in a little town called Centerville, Ohio, and my grandparents, both sides, lived in Springfield, Ohio. So the back roads through there, through Xenia and on, were always through Yellow Springs. And I can remember my father in the 50s slowing down the car to me when I was just a little shaver, 7 or 8 years old, and saying, "Son, you see that big tall man walking there? That's Arthur Morgan. He created the Miami Valley dams, and then the TVA. He's one of the greatest men in America." Pointing out like that.
Well, the Antioch turns up as a part of Evergreen because one of the deans that Charlie McCann hired was interested in work study. And that's how, part of that tradition got mixed into what we did at Evergreen.
I spoke to Betsy Diffendahl at Evergreen,
Yeah.
who's retired or whatever, but they're doing a big visual history. And so they have old film of you. We were talking about you. And they've got stuff, and they're spending sizable amounts of money to transfer all that old footage that was done when you guys were setting the school up into like their historical archives. They're trying to make it a visual archive rather than, a word archive, so a written word archive.
Yeah, she sent me a disc of sort of an early take on that.
On that, good.
Yeah. But what we need that kind of stuff for the union.
Yes.
And that's what
I'm trying to get at. Now, it's very hard to get at the union material now. Maybe if it fell apart, I could get at. I know where all that stuff is, and I know Evelyn Freeman did all the categorization, when they took her out of the graduate school and put her up in the attic. All she did was archive all the records and stuff. And I was up there one day, talking to her, rummaging around. She pulls out the 1.5-page proposal that Goodwin Watson gave to the Ohio Board of Regents to get authorization to do the PhD. 1.5 pages.
Yeah, but he was Goodwin Watson.
But he was Goodwin Watson.
Where is all that stuff? Is it still up on the third floor?
In the attic, yeah.
In those boxes?
In those boxes.
Oh, shit.
Holy shit.
So how to get at it? I figured my strategy to get at it is do some interviews like this, start to build a real, a reservoir of information about the graduate school at least, and then go to Han Min, who's on the board, and say, look, I want to get access to some of that. I don't have all the material. I'm using all the material I've got. You'll see the website's full of every NCA report, all those secret reports that got released, they're all up there, because A, it's historical in nature, but also the point of view in those reports, accreditation, special reports, it's reflected in those reports about the respect, I think, that they had for the idea. Their problem with us was always about implementation. You're screwing it up, basically, when they would come in and, beat us back. But those reports are beautiful historical statements about, it's like a snapshot in words of the Union at that moment in time. And those are great. Those are all up. And I don't want to repeat any of that, but I need access to more of that kind of information. You know what I mean? And I also need to get around to some of the people to talk to, for example, there's a meeting I'm supposed to go, but November 1, 2, and 3 in Colorado Springs at McAndrew's place. They have a film thing. It's mainly the girls, Petty Menkelby and Mary Sheeran, and they'll all be there. So they wanted me to come. And I said, well, if I come, I want to talk to you guys, interview. Well, okay, that's okay. Then they tell me that Atkins heard about, I was going to be there. He wants to come. I don't want to go if he's there. I have a real...
He's a pain
in the butt. And, people say, well, why can't you let it go, blah, blah, blah. And the thing is that when I was on the Council of Representative things, whatever they called it, and trying to bring the faculty together to seriously address the OER concerns, which I thought were on the target, And I had worked my butt off to organize this meeting where we could come up with a new classification of the degrees. And Atkins at that meeting just said, that's not of any interest to us or me, and took the meeting right out of my hands, destroyed all my good work. And so I just said, okay, that's fine. But I don't want to be around somebody that does that. That wasn't friendly, you know, and there wasn't any, he had a personal grudge against Connolly for whatever reason, I don't know, and he used a lot of his own thingy boobies for that, and that, I don't want that. And if I go and take those people there, that's what I'll get, more of that.
Yeah.
I don't want it. I don't want that. It's not interesting to anybody. What's interesting is, what the hell were we trying to do? You know, what was it? That's really important. And what do people say about it in higher education and large? That's important. Because I've figured out there are like 60 people from colleges and universities, professors and deans and presidents, who visited and evaluated that place. I mean, no school has that kind of exposure, I don't think, in accreditation, which I know a lot about, because they'd come up in 10 years and you get 3 or 4 people. That's no real assessment. We have people after person, consultants and everything, coming in under constant scrutiny by what I would call the field of higher education, of this one innovation. And I think that's important to document, you know, about the scrutiny that the place got. So, you know, the design, the overview of it, and then I want to put in some things about some of the students, you know, some of the graduates. We've got some good graduates, and you know, that have done really nice work once they left. And so if I can pull it off, that's what I'm trying to do. Okay, I'm probably crazy, but I'm going to go out that way.
I just want to throw in a little something that I discovered earlier this week.
Good.
I looked up Deep Springs.
Oh, goodness.
And Deep Springs was founded in 1911. And they have graduated a total of 1,000 people.
Wow.
2 of them have already won MacArthur Genius Grants.
Jesus. That's good. You don't need it.
I mean, their list of alums is eye-popping. And the big debate there now is whether to increase enrollment to 26.
They're still running the ranch.
Still running the ranch.
Yeah.
The guy I hired to be the head of environmental studies at University of New England when I was dean there was 11 years on the faculty at Deep Springs.
Wow.
What I'm amazed at is the influence of really tiny little revolutionary organizations. Black Mountain.
Black Mountain, amazing.
The maximum enrollment ever was 324.
Yeah.
And Merce Cunningham just died. You know, Merce
Yeah,
Cunningham wasn't a student or faculty, but he came in there because Rauschning was there and began to put on some of his dances first at Black Mountain. Joseph Albers was there.
All Goodman.
I mean, just, it's had an enormous impact. It's a tiny little fly-by-night operation. And I think the union, somehow, despite its small size, has had huge impact.
It's hard to nail it down, but I agree.
Nail it down.
Yeah.
But, you know, Capella is simply a spin-off from,
Certainly is.
and they're doing real well.
Are they for profit?
Yeah. But they came right out of the bowels of the...
They sure did. Hired the faculty. I mean, if you look at their first folks, they're all union people.
When did you start at the union? I'm trying.
Well,
How many years before I arrived before Conley arrived. Conley is sort of the divide of something.
He's the huge divide in the union. King Cheek leaves, Conley shows up. And, you know, King Cheek leaves under a real cloud of weirdness, because this was to be the real accreditation visit. And I had worked it out that Don McCartney, who was the dean of the School of Education at University of Wisconsin-Madison, was the chair of the accreditation team, a real buddy of mine. And he would give us a fair shake, no doubt about it. And they had a great team. And they meet, they get in the night before, they show up that morning in the boardroom with the team and the board and everything, and King Cheek gets up and resigns.
Jeez.
We're in the middle of that.
Jeez.
So everybody's looking around, and Don McCartney looks over me and he says, you know, he gets me out of the room. We go on hall, and he says, we can't be here if there's no president. You cannot visit a school under the rules of the NCA. You got to have acting. You got to have somebody there who can say yes or no to what the recommendations are, right? He says, and you haven't got time to get anybody, and nobody knew about this. So he says, you know, you've just got to take the team to the airport.
Why did King Cheek do that?
I've asked him that. I've gone and had a number of well, there's the two reasons that he did it, and the only one that I believe. And the one that I believe was the note that his wife left on his pillow. And she, when he had come, he was having an affair with Emily Fitzpipes, the head of the graduate school. And
oh God.
She leaves a note on his pillow, which says that if he doesn't quit, she's gone. You know, and that was, and you know, at the time, she had never moved to Cincinnati. They had kept their home out there, near Morgan State, and all that stuff. And his brother was at Howard, and so he just flipped out and resigned, took off, and he did it because the guy at New York Institute of Technology, Alex, I forgot his last, had said to him, "You've got an open position here as vice president anytime you want it." So he just went from one to another. He had it all arranged, and he really fled, I thought. But it really flipped out everybody on the board, the accreditation people. It wasn't done very professionally, you might say, about letting folks know what the hell he was going to do. But that was it. And the real reason, I think, the reasons that he gave was that, he didn't have the ability, to kind of lead the school to where it needed to go, and blah, 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 the normal disclaimers of departing presidents. But I didn't believe that. I believe the note a lot more of them. Because she really laid it down hard to him. So, then when Conley shows up, he's brought in because the place is already in financial, precarious financial position. And we had gone through Chapter 11. We were in it, Chapter 11 by then. Went into that in '79. And the Chapter 11 thing came about, there's an oddity about it. We didn't know anybody except the students and the faculty where the folks where that had come. And that was under the old 20% of your tuition was given for you to go take courses at other universities, which I always thought was a good idea. So they owed the students who had done that, paid those monies out, they owed that to them, and they didn't pay it. And but they, they paid the phone bill, they paid the airline tickets, all that was always taken care of. But John Sullivan was the guy. King Cheek's out there as president, and then Jim Dixon's chairman of the board of the union at that time. And he decides that going for Chapter 11, which was the first time that an institution like this had ever gone, any public institution, university, had gone into Chapter 11. And I went to all the court hearings because my job in that was to, any question that came up about the program, undergraduate or graduate, I was the guy that was supposed to answer it, and then the money guys were there taking care of how they were going to pay back, not much on the dollar. And this guy Perlman was the bankruptcy judge, and says, I've never had anybody come in, you know, from an institution like this, organization, to do Chapter 11, and he was a very good guy, and you know, that really was interested in how to get the union out of this dilemma. So it was on the way out when Conley arrives, but he's brought in because they tried to hire some other people who wouldn't take the job because it was too precarious. He came in to get the money straightened out. And then you show up.
What was Conley's first name?
Robert T. Conley.
Yeah.
I don't know what the T was for.
About Bob, he'd been a dean at
Wright State.
Wright State in Dayton, and his secretary, his administrative assistant, became a student in the graduate school. Was working on her doctor's degree, and Conley was asked to be a member of her committee.
Right.
So that's how he found out about the union. Then he left Wright State to become president of the Catholic school, Seton Hall.
Seton Hall, yeah, he was in New Jersey.
Right.
He was there maybe a year, 9 months, I believe.
Right. Now, his departure from Seton Hall is still, as far as I know, shrouded in mystery.
It is.
He claims he got into a principled battle with the bishop and some members of the board. He never went into any detail with me about what the principled conflict was over. He always presented himself as having been, you know, sort of heroic defendant in a battle in behalf of faculty interests and high academic standards against the corrupt politics of the board and the church. But I think his prickly personality had something to do with his demise.
I do too. I don't know the facts there at all.
But
it was
he
very
ended-
fast, 9 months in and out as a president. They don't like
He
to do
ended
that.
up then without a job and living off of the severance package that they gave him. He heard about the union's opening for a president and applied. And interestingly enough, at about that same moment, I heard about the opening on the patio of the University of Wisconsin Student Union, which is one of the world's nicest places to drink
I've
beer.
smoked there, so I know.
Oh, that's a nice, yeah, I like
It's a
it.
beautiful place.
I
The
had-
old building.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd been running a reunion of the alumni of Micklejohn's Experimental College. And I had invited as one of my guest speakers to the conference, Elizabeth Minnick. And Elizabeth Minnick and I went off to have a beer, and she told me about this opening and why didn't I apply. So I did. And I got turned down, and Conley got.
Yep.
Who was on that search committee?
I have no idea.
God.
I'll bet you Woodbury was involved in this.
Who?
Yeah, Robert Woodbury.
Oh,
was
Woodbury, yeah, sure.
Very, very much
I'll bet he
active.
was.
Well, but wait a minute. Yeah, he would have been, but.
Leo
was chair of the board.
Leo was chair of the board. Leo Goodman Malamuth at Colorado. I mean, Chicago's state.
Governor State?
No, Chicago's state.
Is that right?
North, what was it? Yeah, it wasn't Governor.
Long Beach.
No, it was in Chicago. Wasn't Leo was in Chicago, and they had Chicago
Oh, he was
teachers.
a governor state.
Yeah, he
Was he Governor
Yeah,
State?
he was a governor State.
Oh,
Governor state, and then he went to law.
oh, okay.
He was sort of one of the, portrayed himself as the founding president of one of the experimental colleges that popped up over that period of time.
Yeah.
I'll bet you.
So
I'm gonna
anyhow,
talk
Bob
to Woodbury.
Connolly had to drop dead before I got to be president.
Yeah, that's the truth, isn't it? Yeah. 2 o'clock in the afternoon, yeah.
For some reason, I had thought he was at Bowling Green for a while, so the right state, I'll be damned.
Now, then, the board, or the committee, picks Bob Conley. He arrives. For some reason, he gets off on the wrong foot with a bunch of the faculty, with Bob Atkins and Mary Sharon.
Yeah.
What? I mean, let me put it this way. From say a conventional perspective, they were damn lucky to get him, an ex-dean from Wright State who knew the Ohio system.
Right, they had to deal with the Ohio Board of Regents.
I mean, he knew the Board of Regents, he knew the Ohio legislature, and so on and so on, who had been president of a major university.
Yeah.
And who was willing to take on a little fly-by-night outfit in Chapter 11. They were damn lucky to get him.
I agree.
Yeah. And damn lucky to get a guy whose academic and intellectual career had been so utterly conventional, and yet who, by virtue of having served on one of the union committees, already knew something about the union process and liked it.
Sure. He was a dean for how long? He was the graduate dean for 18 months. And president.
And the president. Yeah.
Both jobs.
Yeah.
He liked it. He wouldn't have done that.
So I think that, they were lucky to get him.
I agree.
And he pulled he grew the institution.
He certainly did.
But God, what was it? I think in some ways it was symptomatic of profound academic elitism. He was a polymer chemist.
Right.
He didn't look and sound like an effete intellectual.
No, he was a long ways from that.
But when I got there, that's much of what I heard was about Atkins and about Mary Sharon and about his enemies in the faculty.
Right, now, I don't know, I can't remember. Because I was the provost at that time. He shows up, I'm still provost.
You're still provost.
Yeah. And
but why
Crawford is dean. Right, he had been hired as dean.
And he really wanted to get rid of Crawford.
He wanted to get rid of Crawford. Now, whatever they didn't like it, he calls me into the office, Conley does, and says, well, some parts are good and some parts are not so good, but you got to get rid of Crawford. And I said, well, what's the guy done? Well, he says, doesn't matter. Build a fire. He said, his words to me were, build a fire under him that makes him so uncomfortable that he won't stay. And I said, I can't do that. It's not me. I don't do things like that.
Now, Crawford was having an affair with Penny.
Sherry Penn. Yeah, oh yeah.
Sherry Penn.
Yeah, that was supposed to be a big secret, right? But I was down and I saw them together in Cabo, Mexico.
And the reason that Conley fired him was he received a packet of love letters from Crawford's wife, between Crawford and Sherry Penn.
Yeah, I was in, I come in from California and I was reading dissertations in the office, getting ready to, sorting them out, because Paul Heiss was coming in to do an evaluation of the dissertations. And so I was the faculty had selected what they thought, and I was looking through those, and the library was right across from Crawford's office, and he had gone. This woman comes in. I didn't know it was his wife. And I was paying attention. And I'm looking, this woman is going through his desk and then going through his waste paper basket. So I walk in and I say, is everything okay here? She said, well, I'm the bar. She gives me the story about this guy. He's terrible. I just said, well, just go right ahead. I'm not going to get involved in any of this. So you want to search through the waste paper basket, you have a good time. But I said, I didn't pay much attention there. I was sitting busy. I did not keep up with all the intricacies of who's doing. If I saw Sherry and Crawford together in more than a professional, relationship, it registers. But that's, Jesus, this lady was pissed off.
But see, I, to this day, can't recall ever hearing Connolly beef about the intellectual or ideological or educational philosophical positions or views of Crawford or, what?
I don't know why he didn't like Crawford.
And then, of course, Crawford was one of the founders of Capella.
Right. I don't know.
And the same goes for Atkins and Mary Sharon and so he felt, I think, in faculty like Atkins and Sherry, a challenge to his authority.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I bet he was. The thing I liked, he was different from the other presidents who he really took time to understand the program. I mean, even running it, but I mean, no other president since then, except for the interim, you'd been on the faculty, but I mean, when they hired after that, Judith didn't know anything, didn't give a shit. What's his name? The current guy doesn't care about the program.
See, at one time or another, he'd done everything. He'd been a core faculty member.
Yep.
He'd been an adjunct. He'd been dean of one of the centers.
Yep.
That was a funny moment. Instead of sending me out to San Diego to be dean to fill an opening, he went out.
That's right.
So he, as dean of an undergraduate center, was reporting to me, and I was reporting to him because he was the president.
Nicely confusing.
But he'd been dean of the graduate school.
Yep.
And he'd been president.
Mm-hmm.
And I once asked him, why don't you appoint an academic vice president?
Yeah.
He said, I'm the academic vice president.
Exactly right. He didn't like the provost. He didn't want anybody. He didn't want anybody in there. He wanted the deans reporting to him. It's the kind of system he had. I went on the faculty then, and that's when he and John Sullivan got into it, right? Because John had gone for the presidency and didn't get it. He was a candidate in there. Didn't get, even though his sponsor was Dixon. And then he fired me. I got this registered letter, John and I and somebody else, Ivo Verbeek, a guy in Holland. We all got these letters summarily dismissing us from the university because we had tried to set up undercover secret university without walls, in Holland. Connected up with Antioch had something going on there, and there was some kind of thing with Sullivan and Antioch, and that I must have known about it. Well, I had no idea what the hell I was talking about. I had been to Holland and I'd gone, they did a seminar there, and I was over there, and I had talked to the Antioch people about whether they were going to continue the effort over there because we were thinking about doing something there, but not alone was my idea. If we couldn't hook up with another American institution, so we had somebody to fall back on, it was crazy to go it alone, no matter what they did there. And I know that John had interest in that, but and whether John had filed papers to set up a separate institution there, he may have. That's what Conley said. I never knew. I never saw the papers. I didn't know anything. So I said, well, what am I going to do about this? I didn't like getting fired like that. So I got a lawyer, and the guy says, well, the only thing you can do, he says, is you take your file on whatever you were doing in Holland, and you Xerox that file and send it to Conley, and send him everything you know about it. And he says, is there anything in there that this guy said in the letter that, I said, no, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. He said, that should do it, because then you've been wrongfully terminated, right? And I said, okay, I did that. And so I did get reinstated, but as a faculty member, but with no load, no anything. So I had, and then he made me go through the ranks again. I had to go before the committee to get the promotion and all that stuff. So it took me about 5 years, I guess. So, you know, I could never understand what that. He was just kind of getting rid of the old guys, I think.
That must have been. You know, he used to talk to me in some detail about Sullivan, but I never had a clue as to why he fired you.
That's why. And then I'd come back for a faculty meeting, and finally we had a drink in a bar down at the, you know, in that beautiful Neanderthal hotel that I liked. And you know, he says, well, do you think it's time to bury the hatchet? To me, and I said, well, I do, but I said, I'd like to bury it in your head. He thought that was the funniest damn thing anybody had said to him. I was saying it because I've lived it. But that was it, you know, and from then on, you know, I was active, but, you know, I didn't, you know, I kept my distance and all. I wasn't a, you know, I was trying to build the faculty into some kind of a unit that would respond to OBR and the accreditation people, because I knew they were coming for us, but I couldn't, you know, I couldn't bring them around no matter what we tried.
What I found in Bob was a lot of bluster.
Yeah.
Very slow to make decisions.
Yeah.
And once the decision was made, almost impossible to get him to change his mind.
Right. Yeah.
And so very slow to, actually very, very slow to hire people that he didn't grumbled about.
Yeah.
Now, he fired Fontaine.
Yeah.
I would say largely because Rosenman and I really pushed him to do it.
Well, she made an end run, right, to the board?
Oh, yeah. You know,
yeah.
She got involved in a little conspiracy with 3 members of the board who wanted Bob out.
Right.
And she and the undergraduate dean, Chuck, whatever his
Yeah, I forgot his name. Yeah.
He blew the whistle on her, but you know, it was, you can't have a dean of the graduate school talking to a member of the board about how to get rid of the president, for Christ's sake.
No.
So the board members resigned. And Fontaine was on her way. She stayed on the faculty.
Yeah.
Okay, against this, I find that I'm hard pressed to articulate just what Bob Conley's educational philosophy, ideology, firmly held beliefs were. When he, you know, when he was a dean of science and math at Wright State, my impression from talking to a couple of people in the math department that I knew at Wright State was that he was an aggressive, bricks and mortar, utterly conventional dean, coming off his polymer chemistry background and so on and so forth. He wasn't an educational reformer. He wasn't preaching revolution of any kind. He was, he was trying to build the med school.
Right.
But when he took the job at the Union for Experimenting Colleges and Universities, he accepted its ideology. I think, well, I don't know.
No, that's kind of hard to believe.
This is, this.
I mean, he accepted it, but, he told me, he said he hated the name. So he's going to change the name right away, and that killed me, because I love that word experimenting, and that's the word he hated. And I thought he would, and I was talking to people about it. He's a chemist. I mean, what the hell is going on? Why wouldn't this guy love this word? No, hated it. And this institute thing, I mean, it's nondescript. I mean, there's a lot of institutes out there, and they're always part of something. So, but that was his, agenda to kind of realign it, get rid of the words that he didn't like. And then he had a strong desire for the bricks and mortar. In other words, and I saw how he did it. He took we had $2,000 for each seminar, not a lot of money to bring in guest speakers, gone. He cut everywhere he could in order to get the resources that he needed to do that operation in Cincinnati. Because when he shows up, we aren't in those facilities. We're at Provident Bank.
We're down. That's when
That's when you show up.
In the bank.
We moved from the Victory Parkway, the Boy Scouts who hated us in there because we weren't standard American education. So we got out of there and went to the Provident Bank, which had all our money anyway. So that was a good place to be. But he didn't like being in the bank building. He didn't like that rented facility thing. He thought a place should have its own campus thing, and then got that building and then the other one. But it took a lot to do that, to make that switch. The only place to get that was out of the program, itself, out of the monies for that. And the graduate school, brought in all the money. I mean, it was the one that had the undergraduate UWW program. I thought was the resources allocation there hasn't been affected much. They set their resource allocation out and were able to maintain it pretty well through all the changes, as near as I could tell. But they were very much, center-based, the Philadelphia one, so that was like a standard thing. With the graduate school, with the faculty dispersed, and, to have to redo, the traveling thing, to have faculty meetings, and, it was a different place that you'd have to allocate the resources to, but that's the only place you could take it from to get the resources to do the buildings, remodel it and all that stuff. And once they got into that, Susan Wood told me one day, he says, what he loves to do is pore over the drawings of the building. He doesn't care about what you guys are doing out there. He really cares about building this campus. And, and I suppose that took a lot of time, but when I would go and visit him, in his office there, Christ, there'd be a stack of blueprints, and that was his, that was his baby, putting that campus together, or that building, or whatever, it wasn't a campus, only 2 buildings. And remember, when you were there, when the same thing you showed me yesterday was reminding me of it, because we went to this cultural center here, and it's all built around this house that the lady wouldn't sell, so they could, complete it. So they built the museum right around it. Well, and he had that place down, that whole piece of plot of land, except for that one guy who wouldn't sell it. He rented the bulldozer and parked it down there right at the guy's. I have a picture of that, right at the guy's property line. But that place is still there today. They never sold out. He wouldn't sell. He didn't like Conley. That's what the people in town told me.
You mean the people down at the bottom of the bluff there?
Yeah. His idea was to get that, and that would have completed his campus thing.
But, you know, this is really interesting. Here's a guy who isn't, he's not what I would call a broadly educated intellectual.
No, he's a chemist.
He wasn't somebody who developed some kind of passionate commitment to educational reform or even change until he found himself out of work and took a job as president of a bankrupt institution that he knew little something about.
Right.
And then he took that, what happened to be a kind of experimental educational organization, and saved it from itself. Took it out of bankruptcy, built its enrollments,
Yeah.
but at the same time began to build buildings.
Right. That. Yeah.
Or at
Because
least,
we got into, I did the enrollment cap thing. I mean, that was what our big conflict was over. Because he wanted to go much higher than that, and
but this is so unlike the typical career path of a founder, especially.
Right.
Of an experimental or reforming or revolutionary institution. Micklejohn and the Experimental College, the guy who founded Black Mountain, Nunn who founded Deep Springs, two guys who founded Hampshire College, and I could go on and on and on. I can't remember names anymore.
Me either, but they're out there.
Who had what Reisman calls teleological visions. Created an institution then that was an expression of that radical view of what education should be or could be. Conley is weird. He's
an
weird,
anomaly, right?
A weird actor.
Right, in that scenario.
In this story.
Yep.
And then, of course, the debacle that followed.
Terrible.
When the board, in a hurry to get a real president, although some members of the board thought I might do a really great job, Pruitt wanted a real president, and he wanted either a woman or a minority, because
This is George?
Yeah, George Pruitt.
George is his own person too.
Yeah. Why wouldn't they take Elizabeth? I wrote a letter of recommendation for her, and we organized it, but they had no intention ever. She was a woman. She wanted the job. She'd been turned down for some job in New York.
Minnick?
Yeah.
Oh.
oh no, well, maybe that, but she got turned down at Evergreen.
That's true. She applied there.
And I was
Were you a sponsor for her there?
Evergreen, and I found out she was wildly popular with the faculty. She was number 2 out of the final 1-2 candidates.
2 candidates, and she's number 2?
She's number 2, and I got a call from somebody in the Department of Employment at Olympia who was a graduate of Evergreen and a friend of mine, and she said, well, it's down to 2, and I said, is Elizabeth one of them? And she said, yes. And I said, is Elizabeth going to make it? And she said, probably not. And I said, she said, I can't answer any more questions. I said, well, is the candidate that looks like they're going to make it black or white? She said black.
There you go.
was a black guy who had been a dean at Evergreen and gone to Western Washington, no, Eastern Washington, Pullman.
Oh, I see, came back.
So, you know, poor Elizabeth.
Didn't have a chance, no.
What she suffered from was lack of administrative experience.
Right, didn't have it.
This guy had gone up the usual.
Yeah, he did the track, right.
George
But anyhow,
George must
Pruitt
have
wanted he wanted a woman or a minority, and they came up with a slate of 10 finalists that they were interviewing, and then there was the surprise candidate who came in late, a woman working in the Department of Ed, right?
No, the biggest organization in Washington, what's it called? Not the American Council on Education.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
she was the VP for Women's Affairs or something.
And she'd
Right.
been a president twice.
Yes.
And they didn't.
Keene State, New Hampshire.
Yeah,
They
that's-
didn't do
check it
enough.
out.
They
You
didn't
have
do
due
enough
diligence.
checking out. She's got why she'd been fired from both of them.
Yes.
She was an alcoholic, and she was a nut.
Yeah, more nut than alcoholic, but
Yeah.
she was crazy. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
Jesus.
like Birnbaum.
Like Birnbaum,
Yeah.
with the glasses.
Yeah.
She said, I'm throwing with the
So
glasses on."
I had received overtures from Vermont College and turned them down, but she bought it and wanted to move the whole shebang to Vermont.
Yes, that was.
So she could live there.
She had lived there.
Yeah, that's what, it was not about education or
No, it was
collaboration.
just to meet her. She had specific needs that
Place
she
of
thought the
residence.
school should meet. Yep. No, that was what a fiasco it was to take on Vermont College. You know, they just sold off the buildings. And
What years would this have been? Was Jack at Goddard then? Was Lindquist at Goddard when this was going on?
Jack.
Jack Lindquist, I think he.
Lindquist.
When did he die?
I,
What? 'Cause-
He would have died, well, no, he wouldn't have been, if it was 85, he wouldn't have been president because he was out by then.
Right, he was
for his-
out.
For his own alcohol reasons.
Oh, that's right.
He started really drinking hard when he was up
no,
there.
this was only about 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay, no, Jack
No,
was
Jack,
long.
yeah.
Long gone.
Yeah, Jack died
I remember Jack.
late 88 or 89, he died. His daughter was just through here, Merv.
Huh.
She's a chairman of an environmental studies program at Meredith in North Carolina, Jack's daughter.
Okay, but then I want to come back to something. Richard Jones, in his little book Experiment at Evergreen, gives me a lot of credit for the thing we created there. The elimination of courses and departments and the substitution of the what we call-
Evaluations for grades. The evaluation system you guys had
Yeah.
at Evergreen, fantastic.
and the
Portfolio assessment, my
right,
God,
and
that was,
the coordinated studies programs that
Yeah.
were the intellectual work of the faculty team and the students who had lived together for a year was integrated thematically. And this is an example of what Reisman in the book he co-wrote, I think, with Grant.
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Calls teleological reform. You've got some kind of blueprint,
He created a matrix.
a vision out
Right,
there,
and
and
you're
you
gonna
can
move toward it.
translate that vision into an actual program.
Right.
The vision I had came from Meiklejohn, not from Dewey. I had read both sides of some
The
of the
argument,
debates,
yeah.
and I was a passionate
Yes, you were.
supporter of Meiklejohn.
Right.
And I was appalled that after I left Evergreen, they brought Patrick Hill in from Stony Brook, who was a disciple of Dewey. Okay. Now, Patrick Hill figures in the learning community movement.
Yeah. He wrote some of the seminal early pieces.
So much of, when it came to decision time on big and little things, I was always guided by, in a sense, by my belief in and my understanding of Alexander Micheljohn's theory of philosophy of education. Now the great irony is, and when we gathered our plan, I helped hire the planning faculty, and I seeded it with people that I knew that had worked with me either at in the San Jose tutorial program or at Old Westbury. And we hired a planning faculty of 18. At this time, construction had just begun and we were meeting in trailers.
Wow.
And I decided we should have weekly seminars. The faculty should have a faculty seminar. And I bought the books, and the most important books from my point of view were Tussman's Experiment at Berkeley and Micheljohn's Education Between Two Worlds and Micheljohn's Experimental College. And we read those very seriously over a period of a good many weeks. And the first 1,000 students that were admitted the following year started their academic work in about 12 of these 100-student coordinated studies programs, coordinated around a theme. And that took hold, and it was so successful that that's the major primary curricular building block in the Evergreen system to this day. And it comes right out of Micheljohn's Experimental College. But what Richard Jones discovered when he wrote this little book, Experiment at Evergreen, about 2 years after the planning faculty had seminared on these books, none of them could remember the books.
I'll be darned.
Yeah. The faculty, in other words, becomes devoted to a curricular model that comes out of the work of Micheljohn, but none of them know it. They don't talk about Micheljohn. They don't see themselves as somehow in a tradition.
Right, right. Huh.
Then I go to Platteville, and at a meeting, a conference at Evergreen, I meet for the first time, some Micheljohn alumni. I had never met anybody who'd gone through the experimental college. And they put me in touch with a guy who was organizing something that became the Alexander Micheljohn Education Foundation. And we began to have annual reunions at Madison.
Right.
And on the Madison campus, on the edge of the Madison campus, was an old residence that had a sign on it that said, the Micheljohn Center. So I went in and introduced myself to a young faculty guy who was head of the Micheljohn. Actually, he was head of a little undergraduate program called the Interdisciplinary something. It was housed in the Micheljohn House.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And it was in some ways a kind of a weird descendant of the experimental college, which was closed down in the early 30s. And these guys didn't know any, they'd never read Meiklejohn. They had no idea about Meiklejohn, even though they were...
Center sign is right there.
Yeah.
This is not unusual.
No, this is the way it is. Oh my gosh.
So this is by way of a long run-up to my question about, you know, how does Dewey actually fit? What did Dewey actually have to do with the Union for Experimenting Colleges and Universities? Now, in the case of the community learning movement, Patrick Hill talks Dewey nonstop. But Diffendahl, these other people don't. And as you know, when Patrick Hill and I get together, we may be the only people on earth still talking about
yeah.
Dewey.
That's probably true.
John, you know, Tim Pitkin was my mentor.
Tim who?
Pitkin.
Pitkin, okay.
Yeah, he was one of Tim Pitkin. I was
He
when
was at this conference where I met my first Meiklejohn alum, by the way.
Really?
Yeah.
He was still alive then, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Tim was my mentor, and Morris Keaton, for different reasons, and Barbara Knudsen from Minnesota. The three of them had a lot of influence on me. And then I was Woodbury's graduate assistant for 3 years.
Oh, yeah?
And at UMass. And when I would talk to Tim about that meeting they had, I can't remember, was it the 25th anniversary of Goddard that they had the meeting, or was it the 50th? Must have been the 5th. No, must have been like maybe the 30th or 35th when the union got formed, or at least it got talked about with Dixon and all that. What Tim said was that Antioch's role in all of this, with all the characters that they brought to the table,
Yep.
Dixon, because he and Dixon were feuding at the time, he asked Dixon to give the address at the Goddard anniversary. And Dixon talked about the relationship between Morgan and Dewey, because Morgan was a longtime president of the Progressive Education Association, so that they had this at least collaborating relationship with each other. And people just pick little snippets out of Dewey. They don't really wrap his whole philosophy around what they're doing. They just, you know, like I was telling Ben last night, they do their own synthesis of democracy and education. They just basically take that title and make assumptions about what the book is about, and then project it onto what they think they're working on or what the institution is working on. Though Antioch had a lot of elements of his philosophy, both from the experiential learning, work study, the democratic governance, which really was Gould's more than anybody else. And I can't remember the other guy that was McGregor was there too, wasn't he? McGregor was president there too. So he had that whole democratic management stuff that he was playing with. So, I mean, I think there's a West Coast tradition, which you all were really instrumental in creating. And I don't think the East Coast understood a lot of what you all were doing, except it was more theme-based, more problem-oriented, and you know, in this language, more coordination, more interdisciplinary focus. That wasn't the emphasis from Antioch East was more on experiential learning, not on this kind of merging of content and disciplines and whatnot. I mean, I think there was really a Midwest to the East kind of new college experiments, and then you had so much interconnection of individuals, you know, from Tussman to Santa Cruz.
It was mostly west of the Rockies.
Yeah. It was a very different discussion going on, I think.
Yeah, good point.
See, I used to, you know, I was like Johnny Appleseed. I used to carry around a satchel of Meiklejohn.
Give it at faculty meetings, absolutely. Lay it on the table.
You know,
Read this.
This is scripture.
Yeah, I got one.
This is the book. This is the word.
How did those faculty seminars work, and what was people's understanding of coordinated studies? Those are two different questions. And then how do you see this relating to what the union was trying to do?
Well, very specifically now about what Tussman and I tried to Tussman at Berkeley and what I tried to do at San Jose, and then ended up as central to Evergreen Coordinated Studies program. Let's say you take 5 faculty who get together in the summer and articulate a theme and develop a curriculum for a year-long program. Students arrive and you establish a kind of learning community around this theme. And it's the theme that holds everything together. Now, the faculty typically and ideally would come from many different disciplines. It isn't as though you have 5 faculty who have done their doctoral work on the theme. It's best if none of them have. The best faculty seminars that I ever participated in were seminars in which much of the material was completely new to the faculty. So the faculty seminar becomes absolutely essential to keeping the program going and keeping it coherent, because they are discovering the material and the meaning and the intent and the portent, etc. of the material. And they carry that excitement and freshness into their seminars then with their students.
Right.
Jones in his book says, and I of course agree with him completely, that the success and or failure of a coordinated studies program depended on the faculty seminar. Good faculty seminar, good program. And the faculty, the big temptation, of course, was always when we gathered together, usually on Fridays for the faculty seminar at 9 o'clock in the morning, we want to talk business and complain about the students. And,
yeah.
And not talk about, well, what the fuck does this book mean? You know, because there we expose ourselves as novices. And so the faculty that were careful to restrict the amount of time they spent doing the business of the program, spent most of the faculty seminar day with ideas, talking about the book, the better. But now, see, my question is, do we ever play anything like this kind of teleological role?
No. Different faculty members were more or less familiar with him, and he would come up tangentially, but there was never a framework, that was built upon his at all that I could find. I mean, it worked for me because I knew about him. But
when I joined Conway, that was my sense, that it was a But it was an institution that had been remarkably adventuresome, loose and truly experimental, but that it didn't have a focusing vision.
But as a referent, we never had a referent to
Yeah.
go and say, okay, this idea, is taking us way the hell off course, and this other idea that you got is, in line with, the framework we're trying
And
to
my
get.
idea in that meeting, which I tried to get them to talk about Meiklejohn,
Yeah,
was to see if they'd be interested in,
you're trying to come up with, we needed that at the time. We needed it.
with finding a philosopher.
Right. Because we'd worn ours out, as an oppositional philosophy, as more and more people were adopting things that the graduate school advocated, and these people had experience with it and were taking it back. We didn't continue the development of the model at all. We got separated into our little camps, and then the cliques, developed, and they were more.
See, my sense was that much of the Union founding energy had been spent in rejecting
other frameworks.
Stuff.
Absolutely. Had to be.
That was a drag on real education. But it had remained essentially negative.
Correct.
It hadn't put anything in its place.
Correct.
And that it needed that. I think Elizabeth agreed with me.
Oh, I'm sure she would. Absolutely.
But
I had brought Matthew Miles in as a consultant to the graduate school when I was, to help me with this problem, because he was out of New York there, and he was worried about the kind of contextual framework that you gave to organizations, educational organizations, and he came, loved what we were doing, and that was his criticism. Is that anybody can do anything here, and there's you have no referent to say, well, it's okay, but you can't do that here. You know what I mean? And if anything went, why couldn't they do anything they wanted? And we had no way to sort out what fit and what didn't fit, because we didn't have a framework or a vision or kind of a lens to look at points of view and advocacies, and the whole black thing was out of control by then, you know what I mean? And when you were around, the black faculty had organized themselves, and the women had organized themselves, and, we were more oppositional than collaborative, it seems to me. So most of the time in the faculty meetings, we spent it on meaningless bullshit.
yeah.
If you look at the faculty agendas, I know, I've got them. There wasn't anything going on there. Reports from dumbass committees, and, who cares? You could read the report. I was at the head of admissions, for 10 years.
From my point of view, Ben, the hallmark of the union faculty meetings was going over the stuff that they'd just gone over in the previous meeting. Nobody seemed to remember
anything.
Anything.
Isn't it amazing? It's a good way to suck up time and not get anywhere.
Jesus.
Well, that's a strategy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you didn't
It's
get
a deflection
agreement on it
strategy.
at the last meeting, you bring all that shit up again, see if you
What
can
was
get
it we talked about again? I can't remember.
Yeah, agreement on it again. And then people start drifting out of the room because how could you go through that again? And then some people came and said the same thing at every faculty, no matter what the topic, no matter, there were people going to make this statement. Didn't matter.
So I'm still puzzled by the question of to what extent we're talking about progressive education.
Where are you going to put this place? I mean, it isn't an anomaly because it isn't like something where the people, Miles goes off and builds his own institution and does it all his way and keeps his alliances with other limited, blah, blah, blah. Beautiful, beautiful piece of work. Here comes a union, which is, it grows out of all these disparate colleges and university interests that they were trying to do to, serve new populations and whatever. And then, you know, rather than have lay people, you know, to oversee this development, the Board of Trustees is made up of college presidents and other deans and things, all of who've got their primary interest not in the union, only in terms of what they could get from it and take it back to their campuses and try to introduce it. But we never had anybody, you know, putting forward to the faculty the kinds of framework, the questions that would build the kind of sustaining the framework that we needed.
Okay, if the union for experimenting colleges and universities had remained a really experimenting organization,
Yeah.
that would have been Dewey rampant, I think.
Absolutely. Wouldn't have any place to go.
Yeah.
Would have had to have this kind of teleological
Right.
perspective that
Right.
you talk about, which is essential. He didn't. He got ossified, really, you know, it's
Okay,
very hard
this is,
to change it.
I had this wonderful conversation with David Reisman once, which we were talking about St. John's.
Oh, here? Yeah.
The
Maryland?
Yeah,
the
the
one
St.
here.
John's
Great books.
Annapolis presidency was open and I was the candidate. I was talking to Reisman because he was on the board. I was at Evergreen, still at Evergreen. And he talked about the frozen experiment.
That's St.
how-
John's, yeah.
And if you read Scott Buchanan thought that the list of great books that he and Stringfellow Bar came up with was just the beginning, you know, that it would keep changing.
Yeah.
And that the whole structure of St. John's would keep changing. And instead of becoming, you know,
Ossified, man. These books are
ossified,
these are
frozen, and
Right.
so that the St. Johnnies spend their time polishing and perfecting the experiment and guarding it against
dilution,
heretics
right.
and you know, anyone.
The invading horde.
Right, and the same thing had happened already at the end of 3 years at Evergreen.
No kidding.
And in the last year I was there, I proposed to Charlie McCann that we set up another unit within Evergreen where faculty could teach and students could take regular courses. And that after they got burned out doing the coordinated studies thing, because it was a lot more work for the faculty than anything they'd ever done. They were, you know, they weren't going back through their notes from the last year's lectures. They
Right.
had to read a whole new set of books that they'd never read before, so it was a hell of a lot more work. And the complaint we got at the annual retreats at the end of the first year, second year, third year was how exhausted everybody was. So I did this, and God, you should have heard the human cry. You know, I became this monstrous threat to Evergreen. God. So and then there's been no experimentation or change there.
No,
Yeah.
they splintered. How about the splinter group that went to Tacoma? Remember when Betsy and Maxine Mims, they get pissed off about what's going on in Olympia, and they said, hell with this, we're going to open up our own little outpost in Tacoma.
They didn't change anything.
They didn't
from it.
change anything,
No,
did they?
it's the
No,
same
they just
model.
they moved the geography.
yeah,
That's
so-
what I thought. I looked at both of them. I said, I can't see you. What the hell are you doing? They were trying to explain to me how different it was. Well, they had more black folks because they were in Tacoma. I got that. But that doesn't mean that it's educationally different. It means your clientele's different. What about, you know?
They had more adults too, because they moved on to that base or near that.
Oh, yeah. They had
Well,
more
it
adults.
was the real motivation behind the move to Tacoma was to get access to blacks, because you couldn't get it. You
And they
couldn't get
wouldn't
them
come
to
to
come down
Olympia.
to Cooper's Point.
Right.
Boy, am I in a frozen experiment now. You know, seven years ago, Laura Palmer Newton
Yeah.
asked me to be a consultant to help them devise the new doctoral programs.
Yep.
which I did, and right now it's like being in the middle of a damn glacier. You know, you can't. You know, we made a whole bunch of decisions and did a lot of creative stuff in the space of about 3 months, and then once it gets started and starts growing, nothing changes.
Right.
Nothing changes.
Except the enrollment goes up to hundreds of thousands or whatever it is. You know.
Graduate enrollment has over 5,000. The doctoral enrollment.
Doctoral, 5,000.
Doctoral.
Yeah. That's what that guy wanted from us when we went to visit them. Remember?
Should have done it.
Yeah.
Ben.
Jesus.
We'd be a small program in a big organization.
Yeah, blown out of the water. Oi.
Let me ask you both, and this is probably more directed at you, Ben, initially, an origin question. My memory is that the seeds of the union came out of that Ford Foundation grant that allowed people to come together and meet and talk around teaching and learning issues, so that the fundamental beginning point where people started talking about the experimentation and using the word experimenting was really around a discussion grounded in teaching and learning. Am I off, or isn't that the initial seed? Was that Ford Foundation faculty development grant?
Right, and they had those project changeover.
Yeah.
That's what preceded the union. And it was all, they had 3 summer institutes, they were all done at Antioch,
Yeah.
right on the campus here. The faculty came from various colleges and universities, and the idea was simple, didn't work. The idea was say, well, let's take somebody who's interested in change at college X, you know, somebody who's had and can't get anywhere with it, and let's bring him into this project changeover and educate that person on how to go about making changes in universities and how to, you know, blah, 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 in colleges, this was, and then send them back after the summer institute. And they did that, and they found out that it didn't work, that the poor person came and got all fired up by the excitement of the topics and the people, and then they went back to the same deadening environment, and nobody listened to this person. So that's when they said it isn't going to work to try to change colleges from the inside by re-educating faculty. They had the idea that you could get a little cohort of faculty that had been through these summer institutes, and you know, that would kind of infuse out and change the environment in these colleges. But that didn't work. And Goodwin was the one running those summer institutes, so that's how he ends up connected to the graduate school. And but basically they were working at the UWW there, trying to figure that out on these, and they decided that, you know, since it wouldn't, they would go and get a real piece of change from USO, OE, and Ford to really develop entire programs based on what they'd begun to work on at this project changeover. And that's another piece of material that I don't have, because a lot went on there. You know, that people brought those ideas forward out of the Antioch experience, but you know, it's hard to get his Antioch stuff, maybe later on. But the decision to go for the resources, the idea was to divide the money up, which they did do. Each school that was willing to do a UWW unit got 50 grand, which is a lot of money in those times, and they were supposed to use that money to identify and train or hire faculty.
From the Ford Foundation.
Ford and USOE each gave $1 million.
That's what seeded Flaming Rainbow.
That's what seeded Flaming Rainbow, right. So there were some people trying to start places that couldn't get off, you know, a dime. And Henry Chitty got some of that money and wanted to put together this all-Indian school for the Cherokee. There was like that. There were the folks at Providence who were like the Marxist little enclave up there, and they wanted to develop a UWW program based upon Marxist principles. I read about that. I said it's probably crazy, but you know, hell, why not? You know, give it a whirl.
Was that Lever?
Well, he wasn't there then, but
It was whoever preceded him.
Preceded Lever.
I couldn't imagine him.
No,
being
Lever.
Marxist.
No, but they were wild ass guys. I mean, they. I went to visit them. Oh my God. You know, also, in other words, they had that group. Fresno was another one for the Chicanos, and they had fresh starts, they call them, and then they had the existing institutions that wanted to put in, like the General College at the University of Minnesota, you know, they wanted a UWW unit, mainly to get at the clientele we were going after, you know, the adults, because they haven't really gotten after that crowd yet. So the energy of all that early effort was all at the undergraduate level. Nobody had said a word about a doctoral program until Goodwin brings it up. When they're going for it, they have to go to Ohio State to get authorization for it, because the initial idea was that if we gave you the money, that you would then, that you could design the program, then the folks would graduate, and like from Minnesota, they would get the University of Minnesota degree. Well, the faculties at the participating institutions would have none of it. If you didn't take their curriculum, you didn't get their degree. So that's why the union had to go get degree granting authority, so that when the folks completed the UWW program at any of these other institutions, they all got their own, they got the union degree until they could, you know, get their own degree granting authority. And that was smart. And that was done, Millett was the chancellor then.
Oh, yeah, sure.
In Ohio.
Sure.
And he was like another guy like Conley, you know what I mean? That was very hard-assed and crazy. But he liked this idea, you know, because all the schools were struggling about what to do with the adults. Because, you know, Knowles and those people were all talking about this new land, and so, and at the undergraduate, you could do anything. Really, nobody much gives a shit, you know, that isn't the high, you know, Fruitman, if you want to experiment, great. So when the doctoral thing came in, you know, it was mainly on, Roy hadn't appeared yet. He's still director of whatever it is, graduate studies at Antioch. But Goodwin was, you know, the grand leader, didn't want to run anything. So Roy's brought in to run it. When they get the authorization to try it out, and they do that first colloquium at Loretta Heights, which is also was a UWW site, you know, and you know, and all the first students were only in social psychology. They were all Goodwin's people, either people who wanted to start with him or people who had at Columbia and hadn't finished, you know, with him. So those, if you look at the first people coming in, there's a connection to Goodwin at every one of them. And then Roy's brought in to help run the program.
And simultaneous to this, Chickering takes this idea and writes the big National Institute for Health grant that funds strategies for change, which is the same sort of model, but with Chickering's little network.
Yeah.
With Jack Lindquist running it, and the spin, you know, because I got hired in the second year of Empire State, so Chickering is trying to create another parallel network to what Goodwin, and Goodwin was one of the resource people at that, the first Strategy for Change meeting I went to in '73 at Saratoga Springs. But he was replicating these the seed grants and the model that had come out of Project Changeover and everything. He was just putting his spin on it with the adult development, learning theory orientation he had.
Right, and the whole thing was portfolio development, really, UWW. It wasn't on new curricula, really. It was on how do you acknowledge what the skills and knowledge that a person, if they're an adult, if they bring to the program. And there wasn't any system in place for doing that. And this Project Changeover was the first effort, you know, to try to come, what did come out of there was the portfolio development idea. And then, you know, carried out in various places, and they instituted it in all the UWW. That's the great contribution, I think, that has been sustained from the UWW effort. And, you know, there was that effort you told me about too, where they tried, and where Cale tries to, with other, you know, kind of build a coalition of folks who believe like-mindedness, but the experimental folks never worked together. We didn't go to the normal places. Like, I kept going to, you know, when I was on the faculty after, which I came on the faculty in '75, as they wanted a West Coast operation, and they wanted it on the University of Pacific campus, because it was one of the consortium members, and the idea was build the experiment on the traditional campuses so that you can be an example to what everybody else is doing. That sounds like a good idea. So they had nobody out in the West. And I had taken a year off from Wisconsin, and I was trying to figure out what the hell to do with my life. And I had my little sabbatical, and I was out there running around. And Baskin calls me, and he said, would you be willing to go and talk about the graduate school at the University of Pacific? You know, I said, well, sure, I'll take a run at it. I had become, the only thing I had connected to the graduate school is Han Min was a student. I had become his adjunct professor, like Conman was an adjunct professor. And I went out there, and I met with the administrator, presidents, and all those people. Then they said, well, it's a pretty controversial program here. Would you be willing to give an address to the faculty, because we can't let you on the campus until the faculty agrees, you know, that you'll be okay. I said, sure. So I go back and I get ready to come, and I made this terrific little presentation to the faculty, and they thought it was pretty interesting. And then they said, okay. So then, while we had set up temporary offices in Stockton, John and Betty Poole wanted out of Yellow Springs, so they came up to help me set up, because I was just out of the blue. But I had those two folks to help me. That was great. And so we're on the campus at University of Pacific, and they said, you know, you have to, you know, think about where you want to house your operation. And I said, okay. So I said, well, how am I going to solve this problem? So I go and talk to the head of buildings and grounds. And I say, you know, we're trying to find a little place here. What do you got? And he says, you know, let me show you something. He takes me to a greenhouse that had been completely covered over with tops and shit. I mean, you wouldn't know it was there, basically all. And he says, I always wanted to fix this up, and nobody's interested. And I said, we'll take it. So, you know, he starts to furbishing that place. And I'm going there every day.
In a greenhouse.
Yeah.
What a metaphor.
Beautiful. And it was a gorgeous place. Beautiful. And
of course, he had no idea.
Yeah, it began to take place. And we're down to, so the guy says to me, okay, you got to pick the color of the carpet. You know, we're almost done. And I said, okay. So he says, but before he says, you know, the vice president for finance wants to see us. Okay. Must be about the carpet. So I go in, and he says, boy, that is a beautiful place that you and the folks have put together here, and they put together for you. I said, yeah, I really appreciate it. He says, well, we're not going to give it to you. I said, how come? He said, because we're taking it.
We found a jewel.
We found a jewel. We are not going to give it to this outfit company. He says, I said, okay, that's too bad. After all the work I've done creating this environment, because I had rooms in there, you know, for a little cloak. I mean, everything was beautiful. No. So that's just, so he says, well, we want to put you up in this elementary school on the edge of campus. And I said, I don't think so. I went and looked at it, but you know, it was I looked down the hall, you know, it was all those lockers. I said, I'm not going back to high school. I mean, I'm just not going there. To hell with it. So I said, no, we're not doing that. And he says, well, too bad, you know, you're on your own. So I went, and by that time I met up with Spivey, who was the head of Pacific Medical Center, which had the UOP Dental School, was in San Francisco. So I went and I laid out my whole problems to him. And he says, well, if you come earlier, I would have told you that's how it would have ended. But he says, look, why don't you go out and just rent a place, you know, in the neighborhood here, close to the university, you know, to what we've got here, and we'll cover everything that you want. And I said, fine. So I went and rented a Victorian on Pine Street, right near their offices, and they were terrific. As long as we were there until John Sullivan called all the units back because they didn't have money to support them. And but that was a sweet little operation. And this guy Spivey, I've always will respect him, because he said I had the same trouble with those people in Stockton that you ran into. But you know, it would have worked if I hadn't. You know, it just looked too good. It was so beautiful, but it didn't work. But we were in San Francisco, what, 5 years. That was okay. We built a unit there. And we developed a seminar program there. I said one of the things I wanted to do, which was to keep the union experimenting, because it was lockstep by then. You know, they had 6-week-long colloquia. I said, you can't do that to adults. You can't. That's not the way. They got their families, you know. The people were bringing their families with them to the damn colloquia. All the kids, I mean, they were, you know, they weren't getting their work done. And so I said, look, we need to break it up. We did a 10-day colloquia and the 3 seminars. I said, can we have that pattern? You know, just let us try it. Well, it used to work like a dream. It's exactly, people can get a week off. 10 days, that's no problem over 2 weekends in a week. Perfect. And then the whole graduate school adopted that model. So when you arrived, that model had already been developed. And I felt, you know, there was the union for experimenting colleges, you know, still experimenting. And they did try some other things, you know, they tried they had the graduate school broken up into regions with the West, and then there was the one at Yellow Springs, and then they had the leadership in education. They tried to do that with Jonathan Dalby, who, you know, and they just got the wrong guy for that. He's a nice guy, but he didn't have a new idea in education, and that's not how you rethink the education of teachers. And what do you do with teachers? You know, they didn't, you know, it wasn't teacher preparation because all the people came in were already accredited, sort of certified, I mean, credentialed. So you had to have a different approach to these folks, and they never got off that. And, you know, he ends up in Massachusetts running a community college, which was right down his alley. So that one didn't work. And then they tried to do an institute, the Goodwin Watson Research Institute. He was very old by then, and so they named this institute after him. And it allowed 25 people to come in, and they didn't have to follow any of the rules of the graduate. They could really design their own program and get it approved by the faculty of the institute, which was a good idea. And there were a few people that did some good work there. But, you know, most of it, well, then there was the Center for Minority Studies, but that was Nick Ford's operation in Maryland, and that was the idea to build a real, you know, black base for the graduate school out of that thing. But, you know, they didn't have any standards. I mean, it was pathetic what they, you know, you got into reading the PDEs, some of those, I mean, I read those early PDEs from the Center for Minority Studies, and I took 3 or 4 of them in, and I said, we're not going anywhere with this. This is not a doctoral dissertation, and you can't award the degree for that. You know, well, how can we turn Nick down, and all, they've gone through the same process. But I thought that was good because, you know, the getting the quality of the PDEs up was a consistent issue. You know, and like when you were reading them, and we all knew we had to do it, nobody wanted to bite the bullet to raise the quality of the PDEs. And, you know, because we had found out, I always had a quality assurance, and we did the first evaluation after Paul Heist was there. We did our own evaluation. We all read. Everybody read the same ones, and 25% of those shouldn't have gone through the process, shouldn't have gotten out. They were salvageable, but not ready for graduation. But, you know, that end of the line argument that always came up, no more money, no more time, blah, blah, blah. And we never solved that problem. We never solved the quality issue problem on the nature of the product that I could see. They're good dissertations, there were some, they could have been done anywhere. You know, we didn't take the person who had a struggle to do it and make a really good one. We compromised again and again on the quality of the product.
Ben, I want to go back to experimentation.
Okay.
Why, you know, I guess I can think of all kinds of answers, but I lament the fact that an organization that takes as one of its primary missions innovation, experimentation, so as the union did once upon a time.
Yeah.
And as I thought Evergreen did, and as the University of Phoenix did sort of for a while, why they can't keep it going. At the union, we created what the hell did we call it? Something PP. Where we were going to do experimental.
New program development.
Yeah.
Program,
The office
of new program and
ONPPD.
Yeah, I forget. Yeah, you were head of it. Right. And this was to be our little
safe space.
Safe space
where you could try out stuff. It worked. You continued it.
Yep.
Submitted to the faculty for institutionalization. If it didn't, you dropped it. You could make quick decisions.
Right.
Quick changes of course. Try scary stuff. And it was always, and the first undergraduate program we did within the Office of New Program Planning was the Ford Motor Company.
Right, go and work with those folks.
Program, yeah. And it, from our point of view, it was a real success. The Ford people pulled the plug on it. They said because they didn't think the degrees were up to par, but actually they were running out of money.
Yeah. Right.
And under it, we used it to get away with some changes. For instance, we did 3 weekend colloquia without having to take it to the general faculty and argue out whether or not a sacred 10-day colloquium could be messed with.
Yeah.
But here is, here's the faculty you think would stand up and say, way to go.
Yeah.
Okay. The wilder you people are, the better. Just bring the results back to us periodically, say at the annual faculty meeting, to see what's going on and so on and so forth. So there's accountability and so forth. They instinctively react against it as if it's a threat to faculty power. It always comes down to an issue of governance.
Correct. And
the battle between the faculty and the president is is the president trying to pull something over our eyes.
Well, it was very threatening
to
the faculty.
It's the skunk works, and it takes grim determination on the part of, I would say, the topmost people, the CEO of an organization. Lockheed, the CEO of Lockheed had to say, I forget his name, this wild guy who came to him with the idea of a skunk works. Okay, take that old hangar, here's your budget, I'll protect you from the corporation. So they got the Blackbird out of that, stealth technology and all sorts of.
No, that's one of the things, you brought that, I really like that, and it worked for about a week. Like the Rumors Digest, that was another good idea.
What was it called?
Well, the Rumors Digest was Merv's idea. And
the Rumors Digest?
It was a great idea. There was so goddamn many rumors rolling around, and he said, let's put them down. And because when you write them down, maybe they are and maybe they aren't. And it was great,
Well, the prime directive, of course, is to grow and preserve the status quo. That's what you're fighting.
Yeah, that's
no,
right.
absolutely.
And it doesn't take but a moment for it to start setting in. It'll start setting in a moment. You know what I'm saying? It's like a blink of the eye. You can think it's going, and all of a sudden.
It amazed me. Here you hired faculty who were on their resumes and in their words were like, my God, these are very experimental persons, ready to anything, willing, experienced enough. And then the minute they were hired, they became incredibly conservative. I couldn't,
Michael Patton is a good example.
Good example.
A professional hellraiser who, once he gets the Union Institute,
never,
stick in the mud. It's
stick in the mud,
amazing.
right. And all he did was, I talked to him. I haven't interviewed him, but I will. But I had a long conversation with him. And he said, when he found out that there wasn't going to be the kind of experimentation that he'd come to the union for, and ran into the faculty, that that he was just going to, he wanted to do that project evaluation stream that he did, so he recruited his own people, so he had his own little operation going on.
Build his own little...
Build his own, and you could do that. He could do that. Some people could do that.
Yeah.
Well, he and Mustakas.
Yeah. He and Mustakas did it, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, I can't remember the guy's name that worked for Morris, who was Morris's field guy. You would have met him because he would go out into the field for Morris and do the San Francisco site, or, you know, the Philadelphia stuff, whatever. And he ended up going to work for the MacArthur Foundation. You know who I'm talking about? I'd have to find his card. He ended up retiring in Miami. Morris put me in touch with him because I got the idea that the Union for Experimenting Colleges wasn't experimenting anymore.
Correct.
In maybe the late 70s. And Morris set up a meeting for me with this guy in Chicago, and what we talked about was going, and you and I had this conversation too, going towards a bunch of community-based organizations who were more connected to the social change that was really emerging in society, and create a whole new network that would spawn educational experimentation, but coming out of community-based organizations. And I guess what I'm saying all this about is, can there be another moment where something like the Union for Experimenting whatever gets created again that has an educational and social change agenda? And how the hell would that happen? Is that too far-fetched?
Well, I think about that, some of the essential ingredients of that, you'd have to have a consortium. The consortium that supported the Union provided cover. And until that New Orleans meeting, where they blew it. They blew it right out of the water. He was there when I went to that meeting, and they had decided the money had run out from the Ford and blah, blah, blah. And so they, in order to sustain the consortium, Dixon wanted each university and college to put up $5,000 unless you were like Flaming Rainbow that weren't yet operational enough to do it. But the major players, you know, and none of them would put the $5,000 up. And that's when they did away with the consortium and put in a regular board of trustees with Dixon as the head of it. And then it became a very cliquey kind of board. But that wasn't the way it was in the beginning, because those were exciting meetings when those universities and colleges never met. You know, the array of institutions that were involved in that, you know, from community colleges to major universities, you know, Minnesota and all the rest, to you know, geographically dispersion. This is a group that didn't exist in American higher education, and they loved the communication that they had, because they, you know, the community colleges could really, instead of bitch about a university, there was one representative of it right there, and vice versa. You know what I mean? About whose job is what, and who's more experimental and trying to be, and blah blah blah. And so that dialogue, if it had continued, and there had to be a way of maintaining the consortium. I thought they were very short-sighted to let it go, but there was a, you know, people saw that this was a real moneymaker. This baby was cooking by now, you know, things that, and they hadn't gone into bankruptcy or anything. There's a lot of money kicking around for these things, and the, you know, the guys that ran it got greedy, I thought, and just, they eliminated the kind of support base. So for anything, you need that. And I was really, since we couldn't create it anymore, I was always for, there are networks of community-based organizations out there with educational needs that we can tie to, that we can cultivate, that we can, you know, provide an umbrella of communication with. And, you know, the closest place to that got involved, and it was some connection, I don't know who, was that Ohio School of Politics run by those black guys in Dayton. And you know, they didn't have any college or any, but it was a community-based organization. They were trying to try it with them. So we bring a group like that into the consortium to, you know, see what they would have to say about a it was, you know, it was a political grassroots political organization. And it didn't get very far because it didn't last very long, but the idea was pretty good, I thought, because they needed to broaden it out. One way to keep college and universities honest is to put them in a room with non-college and university entities.
It's very important.
Very important not to let these guys get off by themselves. So I don't know.
See, I think that somehow, and I only have a kind of a dim vision of this, Wikipedia and Wikipedia-like, what do I call it, organizations, networks.
Knowledge networks. They're really knowledge networks.
Knowledge networks, that what we're witnessing is the birth of a, as far as the educators' world is concerned, the birth of a really disruptive technology. I see Wikipedia as a kind of community
Oh yeah.
commons, intellectual commons, that serious educators should work with, not against.
I agree.
Yeah.
If
Now,
I had the knowledge and money, I'd make a mini wiki, they call it. And it would be, anybody could write anything they wanted about the Union for Experimental College Universities. And
Right.
just have that built. Let everybody participate.
maybe you can put that on, work a deal with Jimmy Wales. Last week, I don't know if you two noticed it, in the New York Times, on the front page, there was an article about the Army using wiki technology and processes to rewrite its manuals, its field manuals.
Great idea.
So that
Anybody can
it's
put
not
in. It's not them up there.
It's not
Read
the
this
West
and prove
Point
it.
academics
Yeah.
writing this shit, but the guys
Wow.
out in the field.
That's the power of these wikis.
And it just hit me between the eyes, Ben. If the goddamn, we are so far behind.
Way.
Because at these entry residencies of the graduate school, the University of Phoenix, which has sort of prided itself on breaking custom and breaching barriers and all that sort of shit, the faculty, most of which are utterly conventional,
Very much so.
go into a little litany about don't use Wikipedia. They don't even understand.
I don't get the value. I use it all the time. I use
Everybody uses it.
Incredible resource.
And everybody uses Google.
Yeah, of course. You can't live
And
without it.
nobody, the libraries are relics of the past.
They're just going to end up being depositories.
But what we
museums.
have is the academic institutions have a death grip on credentialing.
They do.
And in a credential happy world, where you have this need system, you need a credential, the employer insists you have a credential, self-respect requires credentialing, in which credentialing plays such an important part that people who buy and sell credentials, of course, have a
Big stake.
yeah, they have a big stake in the whole system.
Yeah, not changing it.
That I think is the big stumbling block to a real revolution in how the society begins to reorganize its teaching learning practices, is the lock on credentialing. And then
Who's the guy that wrote about that? Do you remember? The Credentialing Society.
Well, there was
It was
this,
a nice
this
piece.
anarchist who used to be at Wisconsin, who was out of Cooperative Extension and all. I can't remember his name. I can see his little face, and he just produced stuff after stuff. And I met him at the Highlander Center in the 70s, and he was just totally anti-credentialing. But he was coming at it from an anarchist position, which was, it's an interesting argument, but it doesn't transform the situation. It's like what we were talking about earlier, being against something but not really having
for something.
a vision of what else could be there. But we do, I don't know how we transform this, and this is such a corrupt industry now. And what Ben and I were talking about on the porch yesterday is my father was married 4 times, and the last wife he had was the most right-wing Republican woman I probably have ever interacted with. And almost 5 minutes into any conversation with me, she proceeds to tell me about those liberal commie faculty, And I try to tell her that the real victory, and we were talking about this the other day, the real victory of my lifetime in the academy is the corporatization of it.
Yeah.
That's what's really happened. It hasn't been that the liberal leftists have taken over. It's been that it's just morphed itself more and more into a kind of corporate mentality where anything is for sale. On this campus, the lowest price parking permit you can get as a faculty member is $1,200 a year. That's the lowest price. If you want
closer to the building, more money. I love this place.
Yeah. If you want to park right out here,
where we park,
you're going to spend $3,600 to park right out here.
Funny.
Anything is for fucking sale. Pardon me.
That doesn't matter who that won't you want.
But it's like, God almighty.
Clean.
See, I'm willing to concede that the credentialing might take place in a market, but I think credentialing, assessment and credentialing should be split off from teaching and mentoring and
take it away from them.
Yeah. Well, there's a real discontinuity between taking a young person or an older person and saying, okay, let's work on this together. I'm going to be your mentor. I'm going to be your facilitator. I'm going to help you climb this mountain. And then halfway up, you put on your Lord High Executioner's cap and say, okay, now I'm going to decide whether or not we continue the climb.
Yeah.
So how does the mentee come to trust the mentor if at some point the mentor is going to
switch and evaluate?
Switch into the evaluator? I'd rather mentor the student than that you evaluate.
That's fair enough.
Yeah. And I get paid for mentoring and you get paid for evaluation, but they're different budgets and different institutions preferably, and it'd be nice if the evaluators were all in their office building somewhere.
That's, law did that. Law, if you get a law degree but you can't practice, you have to pass a law bar exam, right? Yeah. Well, that's not run by the university.
Yeah, that would mean that we would have to set up
state boards of some kind.
Yeah, independent credentialing and assessment authorities.
We know enough about assessment now. That's been going on, 20, 30 years. The whole idea went from portfolio all the way to standard,
But, the problem is that the industry has co-opted that when it could to move towards test and examination because there's more money for them to make in that than to have a humanistic system that would have narratives and have a portfolio and, it's like, that's too difficult. So let's just give them a paper and pencil test and see if they have the knowledge. It isn't measuring whether they have any skill. Really, not really. It's another knowledge measurement. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
Should we get some lunch, gentlemen?
Sure.
It's 12:30.
Is it? That's a good time to quit.
I'm having fun. Is this useful to you?
Yeah, I'm having a great time. Yeah, that's the idea.
I'm learning a lot.
Just having a conversation.
I want to say one thing about the portfolio at Evergreen. This just occurred to me. It didn't grow out of the assessment movement. I brought the idea to Evergreen of having a portfolio instead of a transcript. And I got it because my first 2 years of teaching were at an art school,
Oh, yeah.
Pratt Institute,
Got to do portfolio.
where the graduates, you know, didn't go down to BBD&O, and they were in advertising design, and hand the human relations guy a transcript, but they opened up a portfolio of their work.
Is my word, yeah. At the
So
end.
the Evergreen portfolio it has a description of each program taken, the curriculum. It has evaluations by the faculty, self-evaluations, and then samples of work. Now, the most controversial bit of that I had the hardest time selling, but I got it sold, I don't know if they still do, was that the student carried the portfolio and constantly edited it. They could take bad pieces of work out and put better pieces in,
Fair enough.
right up until graduation.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I like the portfolio at the front end too,
Yeah.
because it was a way, you know, I like both because it was a way for a person who had unusual or non-traditional experiences to represent those in an academic way, setting way, where it could be, you know, he could or she could.
See, that didn't even come up for us because we were getting ready for 18-year-olds.
Yeah, right.
We hadn't even
thought
talked
about the adults,
non-traditional.
no. But that's what I loved about Kale.
Yeah. You bet.
But you know, they sold out. They really did. That became a minor piece of their work because they went after those contracts.
Yeah, the big contracts.
With the corporations and the unions. And they kept marginalizing their portfolio model.
So what do they mostly do then?
Well, they were doing a lot of career and high need professions. Like they got this major, you know, did you talk to Diana about what she's working on now? She's running a nursing project in about 8 states because they don't have enough nurses. So she's in there through some grant and some contract and something with some big national association trying to help states with their recruitment and track pathways into the nursing profession. So
What's that got to do with portfolio assessment?
not
Nothing.
a damn thing.
I'm curious about what impels people into an attempt to reform or create an educational revolution or innovation or something. How? Where are they coming from? Where were the people who got involved in creating the Union Institute? Those 12 presidents who gathered around Tip Ditkin's fire that memorable night. You know, what was pushing them? What was motivating them? What was the itch they were trying to scratch? Now, I can remember very clearly what was going on in the Bay Area and what prompted first Joe and then me to do our initial experiments. It was student unrest, the Vietnam War, but student unrest, student dissatisfaction with the way they were being treated by the University of California at Berkeley and by San Jose State, which was a big state college. You know, the famous sign, "Do not bend, spindle, or mutilate." And so we were trying to do something, as we saw it, to save the college for the student, to rescue the college from the university.
Interesting, okay.
To create a situation in which there would be a close and continuing bond between mentor and mentee, between student and teacher, in contrast to the dehumanization of the student that was taking place on the rest of the campus with everybody. And we were especially concerned with the lower division because that's where the large lecture classes were the most common and the most brutal as far as freshmen and sophomores were concerned. We weren't interested in adults. And I think this is kind of interesting. We weren't interested in the upper division. We weren't interested in the university. We weren't interested in graduate education. I remember Joe and I got together and talked about this, and he said, as far as graduate education is concerned at the University of California, he said, I'm content with what we have here, this accumulation of high-powered specialists teaching their students to be high-powered specialists, and so on and so forth. What he was concerned with was what happened in the lower division. And he believed, as a follower of Meiklejohn, that at some point in your college career, or if you were being educated in the college, the primary goal of college education was preparation for citizenship. And here's common territory with Dewey, was to teach free men the arts they needed in order to govern themselves.
And remain free, right?
And remain free. And so I met Meiklejohn. He was 93. God. I was invited to Thanksgiving dinner at Joe's. Joe was married to my cousin.
Joe's husband?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they invited me to Thanksgiving dinner, and the other guests were the Meiklejohns. And he, this neat little old guy, he looked at me and said, "Oh, you went to the University of Nebraska." He said, the man who had been president of Brown University when I was there as an undergraduate, when I enrolled there as a freshman, went to the University of Nebraska as their president. His name was Andrews. I studied in Andrews Hall. And then Meiklejohn went into a reprise. I mean, he told the story of President Andrews' address to the freshmen as they entered Brown College. And what Andrews, who was a classicist, did was to spin out a kind of lecture sermon on what would have happened if Alexander the Great hadn't contracted malaria and died in Asia. And what was intriguing to me was this was a 93-year-old guy, reciting in passages from memory, from the inaugural speech he had heard when he was welcomed as a freshman, about 75 years ago. And so when, a few days later, when Joe called me and said, I've talked to, what's his name? Who was chancellor of the university?
Clark Kerr.
Clark Kerr, about trying to start a Meiklejohn experimental college on the campus. Would you be interested in doing the same thing at Tennessee? Wow, yeah. But and that became my controlling concern and interest for years, was to do something about the 18 to 20-year-old kids, the lower division, freshmen and sophomores, get them ready to be intelligent, liberal citizens of democracy. And for me, and for Joe, the content of the curriculum was just as important or more important, and the curricular goal was more important than developing new and fancy teaching arrangements. Now, the teaching arrangements that we both settled on came right out of the experimental college. Small group of students, small group of faculty, organized into seminars, learning, reading together in thematically based programs. The experimental college in Wisconsin, the first year they spent on the birth of democracy in Athens. And the second year they did community studies. They went out, and that's where Middleton comes from, and so on and so on. And what has survived at Evergreen is the pedagogy rather than the curricular goal, John's goal of a political education for political responsibility. Now, we begin to hear about some of the things going on out on the East Coast. I went to a conference at which the two founders of Hampshire did their thing. They hadn't opened yet. And I met Harris Wofford, and I ended up at Old Westbury, and I met the Highlander School people, and I had in the Bay Area, four of my very best friends were graduates of Black Mountain. Stoller and Marquis, I don't know if their office is still there. They were really well-known Bay Area architects. Stoller designed, what's her name? His house in Sausalito. Our faculty member.
I can see it.
Their office was above the Buena Vista.
Yeah. Hotel there. Carolyn's Road.
So, I heard a lot about Black Mountain from these four people who graduated from Black Mountain. The two of them, Marquis and Stoller, became architects, and they told me, about this wonderful experience in Black Mountain. Well, how did you get into architecture? Well, they said we had to build a building. And so we decided we wanted to be architects. And we went to Joseph Albers, and he says, well, why don't you go to Harvard? I'll write you a letter to my good friend Gropius. So they go up and they hand this letter to Gropius, and he says, have you ever designed anything? And I said, we built a building at Black Mountain, and he admitted them both to the Harvard Architecture School. So that, all of the impetus, the motivation was to do something not only better, more intelligent as far as pedagogy was concerned, but better as far as educating for democracy is concerned, and aimed at today I'd call kids. Now, I'm curious about what kind of ferment played into was a part of the motivations of these 9 guys who end up in Tim Pitkin's living room. They're all presidents.
They're all worried about the future of the Liberal Arts College as an entity, like you're talking about, because the universities were starting to develop their graduate programs. They were getting aggressive.
Okay, so that's something in common then.
Yep. And then I
used to go around saying things like the course is the enemy, the university is the enemy, and I'd shake my fist.
That's good.
I would love to know what Dixon said to them, because that was all scripted.
Because he set them on fire, though.
Yeah.
I mean, this.
There's got to be a copy of that somewhere, Ben.
You think so?
Yeah. What did he try to get across to them?
They had to be passionate
Because
about
they
something.
weren't really a consortium at that point.
No, they're just 10 guys. Well,
Yeah,
the story
yeah.
that I get is that they're being squeezed. The little liberal arts college is being squeezed by all the money's going for the development of graduate programs at the university. They're just beginning to develop masters, and they see that, and they see that's what's happening. And then the whole civil rights action is going on, and they're not part of it. People are leaving the campus to go and participate in those civil rights activities and things like that. And it was, what got me involved in the whole thing was, here I was at a premier institution, the University of Chicago, right? And I need to make some money to pay my tuition there and all that stuff. And so I take a job as a street worker for the Hyde Park Neighborhood Club. And my I become like a social street worker, they called it. It was called the Hard to Reach Youth Project. And they had hired...
In the South Side?
South Side, in Hyde Park.
Yeah.
And the idea was, okay, we've got these neighborhood clubs, and the kids aren't coming, and so and gangs were beginning to form. And so would you go out? There was a Sicilian dude, Chuck, who went out and contacted a black guy, Dick Newhouse, who ends up in the Illinois House of Representatives, and me. Were the first 3 people hired under the Hard to Reach Youth Project. And my job was to go out and make contact with these kids and see if I could convince them to come back to the neighborhood clubs, for the activities that they had there. So I did that. We all went out, we made contacts with different folks, and these kids were not good. That was so boring, to them. And the black kids said, well, if they didn't close at 8 o'clock and had, basketball till midnight in there, we might come and do that, because we're playing outside in the cold, in the courts of the school yards, but they weren't prepared to open the facilities up. And what they offered was of no interest to these kids. Well, so I did that, and then as I got more familiar about, this was all in Hyde Park, then John Fry, who was the minister of the First Presbyterian Church at 63rd and Woodlawn, says there's this gang developing over there called the Blackstone Rangers, and so I began to mosey into that. Meanwhile, I'm still going to the university, and I'm here. I am in what is it called? The Divisional Social Sciences program, and you can. It was nice flexibility for me, but I'm sitting there thinking, I'm reading about all these social problems. They're all over. They're all done. They're trying to educate me about the past, and there's nothing in here about the contemporary problem that I'm trying to deal with, which is all these gangs out there.
Did you have to read Drake and Caton, Horace Caton, and the study of the Black South Side?
No, they didn't know. The university was not. That's what blew my mind. Here I am in this place. They have no interest or awareness. All they wanted to do was buy up the houses and tear them down for urban renewal. We push these kids further out and not have any connection to that at all. And I said to myself, if I ever get out of this school, I want to do something that puts me in a situation where I can have some impact on what the programs are in an institution.
Because in the 20s, sociology at the University of Chicago was all about community studies.
Correct.
Yeah.
But that changed, because I was in that department, and they decided that the best thing to them would be to follow the famous economics department and go to statistical sociology, and they got Janikowski and all these guys in. And I'm sitting in these classes saying, I don't want to be an economist. I live with one. I'm rooming with a guy, and who was an econometrician, and great, but my God, that's not. They wanted to do surveys. Why didn't I want to construct surveys of dentists? And who cares about the damn dentists? I would say, why do you want to construct a survey and find out about these kids out here? I mean, they just didn't get it. It wasn't, academically respectable to study stuff. They couldn't do surveys close at home. But that whole department has shifted, and I don't think it's ever gone back to the kind of social orientation that it had in those early days, which was attractive to me. I mean, I saw the kinds of people that were there. My God! And Edward Spear, he had a half appointment at London and a half appointment at the University. He was a terrific guy, but he says, I'm moving myself out of here. This is not the department I want to be with. So he transfers his appointment away from the university. But it's what kind of got me thinking about there's some disconnect here. I'm in this really fancy joint, and we don't give a damn about our environment that I'm working in.
So from there?
Well, then they had supported me at the credit. That's where I started working for the accrediting people.
Yeah.
And I did that from day one. I went in as the head guy's research assistant. They said, you go take care of him. I said, okay, Norman Burns. And so then I became a research assistant, then I became a staff member, then the secretary, then whatever the hell I was, secretary, the associate secretary. Got involved in all the accreditation stuff. And but then I got tired of that. I visited like 500 colleges because I could go with any team to look at them. I went to the fancy places and the places in trouble and the places where the president was screwing the student or something and causing uproar, and we'd go in as a special team, and I'd always go along on those. Those were fun. And chasing down Roberts, the guy who stole all the money from Parsons and bankrupted it, and trying to, those were fun times, trying to figure that stuff out. But then I said, I got to get into the real world. I got to go do something. So I went to the University of Toledo only because, they were brand new, trying to do something with their education school. And I didn't know if they had enough money, but I thought, well, I'll go over there. And I spent 2 years there. And what they wanted, they didn't just have the horses to do, and they didn't know how to scale down, to something that would be appropriate for that milieu and their geographic location. And while I was there rumbling around about that, that's when Wisconsin came and asked me if I would come over and interview, because they had heard about me from, by then the work that I'd done with the Stones was getting a lot of play, and I'd already been investigated by the Presbyterian, put before some weird, I felt like I was in the Middle Age, in Spain, with the Inquisition. I felt like these guys put me through the Inquisition about why was the church involved with these black kids in gangs. I said, I don't know, I just worked, you should ask those people, were there guns? I said, well, I didn't see any guns. Well, I did, but I'm not going to tell them. That's none of their business. But, that kind of disconnect going all around me. And so at Wisconsin, I said, I'd come. But I said, I can't do a normal school of education. I mean, that's just too boring. And if you'll, let me experiment. And I said, I might not work, but at least I'll have the fun doing it and trying it out. And the guy said, go for it. He said, the guy just died, Denmark. He died, the revered dean of all time, and blah, blah, blah. And the School of Ed at UWM was the biggest school. I had a couple hundred faculty members, 3,000 to 4,000 students. So it was the heavy guy on campus, and had a lot of money. And then I got a lot of money from the federal government, and I just poured it into programs that had nothing. The faculty ranting and raving, well, where was theirs? And I took over a school in the inner city. I made a merit pay of the faculty tied to how many days they would substitute teach in the school. And that pissed everybody off, but they didn't get their merit raise if they didn't do their substitute teaching. On and on. And I started to think community education, because this was all undergraduate. I love that. Yeah. The only thing I did at the PhD level, I did a couple of things at the master's, nothing important, but the undergraduate I put in an institute for education where you didn't have to follow any of the rules to get certified, or to just make up your programs with a faculty member who another guy approves it or whatever, and run with it. And that was great. And then the community education program, I fell upon these welfare mothers and brought them to campus, educated them to be daycare operators, got banks that had closed to let me use their facilities. And so we had great facilities, you know, I open up the vault, man, the kids would be in there running around. But these were beautiful buildings that nobody knew what to do with. I said, I can put a daycare in there. They got a bathroom, they got running water, I don't need much else. And this little community education took over the social foundations department. It's now, those are foundations, it's a little bitty piece of community education, and it's a big program. It's the one success at Wisconsin that is there today. I also started a PhD in urban education, which was interdisciplinary. No department could have its own PhD. All had to contribute to this urban PhD program. The faculty hated it. They hated me for doing it. And the only way I could solve that problem was I brought in other faculty at the tenure ranks to just, you know, roll over them and, you know, let them do whatever they wanted to do. And then, you know, they developed it. The minute I left, they killed that program off. So, you know, my interest was, how do you, then I read this thing when I was at Wisconsin, written by this guy Faber. It was a little piece of paper, a little article about student as nigger.
Oh, yeah.
And my God, it blew my mind. And I said, that's the problem. That, you know, somebody had just put it out there so clearly that I couldn't get away from it.
Do not fold, spin, or mutilate.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. And I said, that's the problem. And so I wanted, you know, that's when I got all involved in, you know, putting that together. So the union looked really good to me as a place where, you know, the student was going to come first. And I had a hell of a time changing the word from student to learner. Dan Gehring came to me and he said, who was the head of Flaming Rainbow, this guy's with me, he says, you know, you're going to do that over my dead body if I can stop you. And I said, what do you got? What's wrong with the word learner? And he says, it really destroys my authority. And I said, that's right, don't you get it? You got it. You got it, fella. That's what I'm trying to do. But I got it through, but not a single UWW unit voted with me. I thought that was a change of word. And I had to go to the board and override everybody to get that done, but got it done.
As I look back on obstacles that I had to contend with, most of them are power issues.
Honest to God, isn't that the truth?